You are the person standing between the state and the individual. The starting point within our criminal justice process is to address the question of who we send to prison. That's the starting point. We have a prison population which is the biggest in the free world. There has to be scope for sending those people to prison, but they should become the exception rather than the rule. I regard the work of defence lawyers in this country as so valuable, and honestly, if the public knew how hard we worked and the way we worked and the ethical standards we adhere to and the commitment we show and the role we play in society, I think they would take a very, very different view.
On today's Legally Speaking podcast, I'm delighted to be joined by Jeremy Dein KC. Jeremy is one of the most highly regarded defence counsel in the country, specialising in serious offences including murder, terrorism and organised crime. He has dealt with multiple high-profile cases which have gained significant media attention. As described by Chambers and Partners, Jeremy is a fighter and no case is too complex for him. He works tirelessly to ensure the right outcome. So, a very big warm welcome to the show, Jeremy.
Thank you very much, Rob. I'm very happy to be here.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the Legally Speaking podcast. Very excited to get into today's discussion. Before we dive into your incredible career, we do have an icebreaker question for you, Jeremy. On the scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being very real, what would you rate the hit TV series Suits in terms of its reality of the law, if you've seen it?
I'm afraid I haven't seen it, and that is all I can say about it.
And with that, you can give it a 0 and we can move swiftly on to talking all about you. So to begin with, Jeremy, would you mind telling our listeners a bit about your background and career journey?
Rob, I've been at the criminal bar now since 1983. I was called to the bar in 1982, so a very, very, very long time ago, although it genuinely feels like yesterday. I was born in East London, believe it or not, because I know I don't sound like it. I'm a Cockney. I was born literally a few yards away from the Bow Bells in Bow Hospital. My father was as Cockney a character as you could ever come across, with the thickest Cockney accent you could imagine, and my mum too. And I grew up in East London, went to a state school, went to Queen Mary College in the East End, although I didn't actually live at home, perversely. Don't ask me why I did that, but that's what happened. Couldn't really prize myself away from my beloved East End. And went to the bar. I was called in 1982, as I've said, and I've been on my journey, incredibly now, for 4 and a bit decades. And that's a very bare outline of my career path.
And it's been such a successful career path. And, we're really honoured to have you on the show. And so getting into a bit more detail then, from sort of the Old Bailey to the BBC, how do you actually balance the demands of being this top tier criminal KC, I might add, within your role, as well as a legal educator, if I can get my words out, and media commentator, because it's a lot of work?
Thanks for those comments, Rob. I don't really see myself that way, actually. I see myself still as a little kid, from sort of sitting on the stairs trying to find out how West Ham were doing in the days when there was no TV football. So it's been an incredible journey. And, it's in situations like this, really, is the only time I reflect upon it. Otherwise, you just get on with your daily life. I mean, it has been action-packed and it remains action-packed, and that's the way I want it to be. And I think the answer is a lot to do with good fortune, in the sense that, I've got a wife who's incredibly free-spirited. So, I've got a lot of independence, and she's very encouraging. I thrive on pressure. It's a bit of a love-hate relationship, but, with all the things that are going on, they just keep me exhilarated and they keep my sense of, ambition and momentum. So I kind of just balance them out, really. And I think, for me, excitement and challenge are the food of life. So that's how I've kept it going. And, at the moment, it's still at the same level as it's ever been. I'm sure there'll come a time in the not too distant future when I'll have to calm it down a bit, but that point hasn't come yet.
And I don't want it to come yet for you, just yet,
Thank you.
selfishly for us here on the show. And you're right, the famous quote, pressure is a privilege. And, I remember a mentor said to me very early on, new level, new devil. As you keep going up or keep getting involved,
Yeah.
there's going to be new things, new challenges, new things you need to
Yeah.
overcome. And it's part of your growth, isn't it?
I think it is. Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah. And you've defended in some of the most high-profile UK criminal trials. So what's been the most challenging case, if you can share, and what did it teach you most about justice?
I mean, I think every case is challenging because if you take it seriously, which most criminal defence barristers do, then what happens is that when you're in a trial, it takes over your life. It really does, and it becomes the focal point of your life for that period of time, especially, obviously, when you're doing very serious cases. But I do think that the most challenging situation professionally was the Talisa case, the Talisa, who was an X Factor judge and lead singer in N-Dubs, who was subject to the Sun on Sunday sting at the hands of the Sun on Sunday and Mazza Mahmood, the fake sheikh, because that case was very serious. She was at risk of going to prison for a significant period of time. She was set up by the Sun on Sunday and by Mazza Mahmood. The evidence against her was difficult to counteract, but morally and in terms of justice, it would have been a real travesty if she'd been convicted. And there was just incredible pressure on me in that case because her whole professional life, her reputation, her personal life were at stake. And so that case stands out to me as being one which was exceptionally stressful and challenging.
And that leads nicely onto a question I was going to ask, linked to your mindset, values, and resilience. And before I do that, I do remember that case. And our listeners will know the Legally Speaking podcast also has our own event with the Hive Risk, the Great Big Legal Offsite. And we actually had the MC, Peter Dixon, of the voice of the X Factor and Britain's Got Talent. It was a fantastic event. So I'd encourage our listeners to go and check out that on the Legally Speaking podcast website to learn more about that event. But in terms of yourself, Jeremy, you've mentioned that case. You're a fearless advocate, obviously known for, unwavering, if I can say, moral conviction. How do you actually stay grounded while defending clients in a very emotional and perhaps very ethically charged case?
That's a very good question. I think what you do is you just commit yourself totally to the case, and you know that you are the person that is standing between the state and the individual. That is a very, very important role. I never lose sight of the significance of that role. And you just fight the case as hard as you can. And in a way, there isn't any room for emotion or sympathy or anger or frustration. You're so all consumed with the challenge that you face, that you just get on with it. And I'm very proud to be a criminal defence barrister. When I'm doing my cases, even now after, so long, I know this is going to sound a bit cringy, but it's genuinely how I feel. I just feel very privileged to have been able to do a job, if that's the right word, which has such importance and which, fulfills a major role in a free society. And whatever the verdict is, so be it. That's not my responsibility. So I stay grounded by just getting on with it, doing what I'm there to do, doing the best of my ability, and, grappling with the challenges that confront me. And there is no time or space to kind of get anything else at the time you're doing these cases.
Yeah, and you're exceptionally passionate and dedicated to what you do, hence the amount of accolades and market recognition you've had. Steaming from that then, I'm just thinking about misconceptions maybe the public has still about criminal defense work, and how do you hope maybe your media work and extra things that you've done is changing that and maybe changing some of those misconceptions?
Okay, well, I think, again, Rob, that's a very, very good and an important issue you've raised, and one that's very precious to me, because I regard the role of criminal defence lawyers in this country. I can't speak much about, other countries, but I regard the work of defence lawyers in this country as so valuable. And honestly, if the public knew how hard we worked and the way we worked and the ethical standards we adhere to and the commitment we show and the role we play in society, I think they would take a very, very different view. And also, especially for the lower echelons of the profession, the fees are not, particularly good at all. And yet people get on and do such a fantastic job. So what my media opportunities have done is I hope, enabled me to get that message across, because there is nothing for criminal defence lawyers in this country to be maligned about. We do, I'm very fortunate. I'm at the top of the profession. So, I have time and space between my cases. I know what my diary is in the future. But the foot soldiers, they run around all over the country day in, day out. They very often don't know what case they're going to be doing tomorrow, whether they go from Bristol to Manchester to Exeter. They get their brief sometimes at 6 p.m. at night because somebody else can't do the case. So they do an incredible job. And, someone like me today, and I'm grateful to you for giving the opportunity, and in terms of my media opportunities generally, facilitate the message going out. Please, recognise the fantastic work that we do. So I'm really happy that I have that opportunity.
And you do it so well, and that's why we were so keen as well as legal educators and trying to, our tagline of the show is inspiring legal minds, transforming legal futures, is to bring information and stories and wisdom from people who have been out there that have done it, that, really know what they're talking about and perhaps can change misconceptions, because the amount of work and dedication and things that go on behind the scenes, as you just touched on there, is phenomenal. So maybe that leads me to the journey then, in terms of how was
but Rob, if I can just, sorry to interrupt you, but if I can just add this. No, I just want to add this. Also, what the public need to recognise, and, I'm not really speaking about myself because I am right, at the top, and so I've had all the years of experience, and I have teams to assist me. I mean, it does apply to me, but it applies much more importantly, so far as I'm concerned, across the board. What the public also needs to recognise in terms of the work that we do, that we're dealing all the time with damaged individuals. We're dealing with people who come from the most oppressive backgrounds, very often people who've been sexually abused, domestically abused, the victims of violent abuse, psychological problems, psychiatric problems, all these things. So we're not only, performing a very important role and working very hard, but the people that we're actually representing, the people we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, are hugely challenging. So there needs to be an understanding of the value of the work that defence lawyers do, because it's very important that, that is recognised. Anyway, that's what I have to say on that. Sorry, I interrupted you.
And that was a very, very important point. And it also sort of touches on a lot of my why, really, in terms of my understanding that I came from probably what might be deemed more of a privileged background. And, I always think I can't change that, but I can pass the baton forward, and I can do good things such as this show and bring on voices like you and educate and do good with that, to put more good into society, to try and make a positive impact, to try and make a change. And so I thank you for doing that, and that touches on a lot of the values and things that we support here. And I was going to ask just around the journey, because we talked off there, and I touched on, obviously we partner with Clio, the world's largest legal technology company. We can't get away from technology is advancing in every industry, and will continue to do so. So from your role as a criminal barrister, I think over 40 years you've practiced, where do you see it heading? Give us your more historical but also forward-looking perspective, and do you see technology having a large impact?
I mean, technology is having a huge impact on the criminal justice system, and I've no doubt will continue to do so. I mean, for a large part of my career, well, firstly, I was called in 82. I mean, computers didn't come about, in any meaningful way until well into the 90s, and mobile phones were sort of early 90s. So it's incredible to think that in the early years of my career, everything was done on paper. We literally wrote everything out on paper and handed it to a typist. And if our clerks wanted to contact us when we were all over the country, they'd have to somehow ring the court to get the court usher, they describe the individual. You can imagine what description was given, a lot allocated to me to try and find the Barrett and so on. And then obviously, as the decades have gone by, things have changed. The biggest innovation in the criminal justice process technologically is the digital case system, whereby in the criminal justice world, everything in every case, bar very few, is uploaded onto one digital system, so that the judge, the prosecution and the defence all have access to that system. Everything is carefully numbered. Sometimes there are thousands and thousands of documents, and increasingly in the criminal courts, it's paperless, and barristers are working simply off the digital system. The challenge for someone like me is to try and adapt completely to that, because I'm used to having files, post-it notes, coloured markers, coloured pens. So I'm a bit of I can work off the digital system in terms of preparation, but when I actually get into court, I still have, the old-fashioned files and stickers and so on and so forth. But also, Rob, in terms of criminal justice process, investigative techniques are, developing by the minute, and trials are now characterized by, all types of technological evidence relating to telephones, CCTV and all kinds of things. So the criminal justice system is moving very, very fast in that respect, even at a time when it's under huge pressure, in other ways. The only thing I just add, sorry that my response is slightly lengthy, but you've raised a really important issue, is that juries are still stuck in little jury boxes with bits of paper and pens. They don't get iPads or computers. So it's slightly odd that, all this technology has, found its way into the criminal justice process of the trial, but the jury are just sort of all crammed in to a little jury box trying to scribble on paper. And that's how it remains.
Do you think that may change?
It might do, but honestly, the criminal justice system is so under pressure financially with the backlog and everything else. You just never know, because physically the courts are falling apart. The actual buildings, the buildings are in a terrible mess, with one or two exceptions. The Old Bailey's still a great and iconic building, but going out and about to the other Crown Courts, which I don't do a lot, but which a lot of my colleagues do, they're all got damp and they're grubby, and there are a lot of problems. So I'm not sure there's much funding to improve the lot of the jury. I don't know, but I doubt it.
Yeah, and it reminds me of when I was a young pup. So my late grandfather, a lot of listeners will know, he ran a successful law firm in Leicestershire, where I'm from, built it up to be one of the sort of, Leicester was the second richest city in the UK, actually, in the 1950s, due to the hosiery trade, and was able to build a very successful law firm that span across the region. And I remember he said, go to the courts and watch. And even back then, they were a little bit grubby. They weren't that great. They looked a bit wrong. And just thinking back to, his generation, where it was all paper, and he would tell me stories of my late grandma at the time, it was writing shorthand as one of the receptionists, taking notes, and they were literally just really paper strong. I'd go to the strong room, I'd go and get the deeds, the files, and everything else. Whereas the modern professional coming in, like you say, it's a lot of it's all online. It's a big sea
absolutely
change.
Absolutely. You very often you very often see in a court centre, in the corridors and so on, almost all barristers just walking around with their... I've just done a long case in Winchester with my junior counsel. I lugged up in my car on Sunday with 5, 6, 7 files and so on. And he kind of, breezed in on Monday morning just with his computer.
Yeah, crazy.
And the same material. So that's just how it is.
A boring, interesting fact. I was born in Winchester. I don't know a lot about it. I was just born there. So I think that's the first people would know. Well, but there we go. Lovely place.
It's not boring. It just shows how, strange coincidences.
Absolutely. So on sort of your career journey then, what drew you to sort of criminal appellate work? And can you share a case where your advocacy truly changed the course of someone's life?
Right. But very, very interesting issues. I think what drew me to being I wasn't so much drawn to criminal law. I was drawn to being a defence. I was drawn to being an advocate for the underdog. I was, I wasn't particularly academic at school. I was a very odd pupil, because I was unbelievably bad at certain subjects like maths, physics and chemistry, where I struggled really badly, and woodwork and art and subjects like that. I mean, my art teacher, he was a very odd man. I'm absolutely convinced that, I was the most hated person he'd ever come. I was so bad at art. But I was very good at the arts. I was good at history and English, subjects like that. And the one thing that I was good at was public speaking, which which was quite odd because I was quite shy. But I did grow up in a strong working class household. My dad was a waiter. It was very much a Daily Mirror household where the Daily Mirror would come through the letterbox. A Labour household, and clearly, as we all do, like you, I just was formed by my background, and I wanted to be an advocate for the underdog. That's what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And so the obvious place to go for that was to the criminal bar. And so that's what drew me to that. And, I haven't really looked back because it's worked well for me. And I still love being a spokesman for what I call the underdog. I mean, whether the individuals are always truly the underdog, especially as you go through your career, where you move into private work and so on. I'm not sure that the underdog is necessarily the right word, but largely they have been. In terms of cases, I mean, I'll be honest, I need to think about your question in relation to a particular case. It's a really fantastic question. If I could just answer the question more widely and say that, especially in homicide cases, which I've done a lot in the last 20 to 25 years, very often the issue is manslaughter or murder for a whole range of reasons. And if someone is convicted of murder when they should be convicted of manslaughter, that's a really serious miscarriage of justice because the sentence framework is so different. So I would say that I feel that the biggest impact I've been able to have is to secure verdicts for manslaughter, just verdicts for manslaughter, in very serious, unpleasant homicide cases when but for my advocacy, there might have been convictions for murder. So a person might have got a life sentence with a 25-year minimum term wrongly, whereas the defence barrister, and you're asking about me here, has been able to get the correct verdict, which is manslaughter with a fixed term of 15 years. So I think, and, in the Talisa case, for example, where I did win against all the odds, my advocacy obviously made a difference there. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work, but it's hard to pick out individual cases. I just think that, the defence advocate can and does often make a big difference and secure the right result on the facts of the case. And that, gives me a lot of fulfillment for myself and for my profession.
Yeah, and I want to talk about the future of the profession because, and maybe, what legacy means to you, because you've held various very senior leadership roles, joint heads of chambers, director of education, the CBA. So what have these roles taught you about shaping the future of the bar?
What they've taught me, I mean, Rob, again, just to divert slightly, when I came into the profession, you won't believe how unpleasant it was. It was so sexist and racist. That unless you fitted the mould, which I did not, I didn't look like a barrister, I didn't even sound like a barrister at that time, it was deeply unpleasant. I think what my roles professionally, in the CBA and as Director of Education, I've seen a lot of changes in the profession. I've seen a lot more, fairness. Women have been embraced much more. Ethnic minorities have been embraced much more. I think what being at the leadership end of the CBA has done has enabled me not just to play a part in opening up the profession over the years, but also to recognise the importance of giving everybody the opportunity to come to the bar because, it is a great profession. It is hugely important. And so being able to make a minor contribution to the development of the profession has, given me the chance, I hope, to promote the changes that when I came into the profession simply were not on the agenda. It was just completely white, male, Etonian. It was actually, quite repugnant. It's changed out of all recognition now.
Yeah, I'd just challenge you on minor. I'd say you've made a major impact from following your journey and what you've done. I think the work you're doing is tremendous, and just please keep doing it. A question in terms of toolboxes. Everyone has skill sets, and so I'm thinking top of mind here. What's one skill that you would never want to lose, knowing that you've got to the top, as you've said, you're at the top of the profession and you were starting from zero again? What's that one skill that you would never want to lose, that you've continuously always been working on, that's enabled you to get to the top?
I think the answer to that is simple. It's passion. It's passion. It's passion to, like, when I came into the profession, I felt that I'd made the wrong decision because I was so out of place. I mean, I'm not exaggerating. I used to stand outside my pupils' chambers in the morning by the River Thames, summoning up the courage to walk through the door. I found it so intimidating, but I just knew this is what I wanted to do. And that passion, so passion to succeed, passion to do the job, and passion in, presenting defences in individual cases. So you've asked me what the one skill or quality that I wouldn't want to lose, that I feel has driven me forward, is, and it is, it is passion. It's not intellect. I don't think, obviously you have to be clever to be a barrister. You have to be clever to do your job. But I think as a criminal defence barrister, if you've got passion, and a jury sees you've got passion, a judge sees you've got passion, your clients see you've got passion, their families feel that you've got passion, then you're on the road to having a meaningful career.
Today's episode is brought to you by Clio. Are you frustrated with your current legal management software? You're not alone, and thousands of solicitors across the UK feel your pain. However, the hassle of moving all their existing client and case data holds most back from switching, prolonging the frustration. Clio is here to help. Their dedicated migration team will be with you every step of the way while you transfer your information, and if you have any questions, you'll get award-winning support available 24/5 by live chat, phone, and email. So help is always there when you need it most. It's no wonder Clio is consistently receiving 5-star ratings for its ease of use and top-notch service. If you're ready to leave frustration behind, visit clio.com/UK to learn more and see why Clio continues to be the go-to choice for solicitors across the UK. Now back to the show. I couldn't agree more, and passion is everything, isn't it? I feel like I'm passionate about doing this. I'm passionate about building community, passionate about helping people, but you can't hide it. I don't think you can hide the passion when you really find your true passion. There's nothing that will stop you, because let's speak off the record here. There's a lot of shit days you'll have in your career, and if you don't have that passion or understanding about why you're doing what you're doing, then inevitably you might give up. And I feel like And so having that, and energy is infectious, and and I think also when you bring that passion to your profession, your craft, whatever it is, not just necessarily within law, I think you attract the right people as well that come to you, that can help you. I'm sure you've had tremendous mentors throughout your career. Maybe
definitely, without doubt.
Talk about that and the importance maybe of mentorship. Is there anything you would say on that?
Oh yeah, I think mentorship is really crucial. It's not always easy time-wise to dedicate the sort of time that you want, but I mean, it's amazing really how young people, how much they cherish the opportunity just to speak to you or spend a day with you or whatever it may be. It's quite embarrassing. You get emails, and you'd think that, that you were offering like £20 million just to spend an afternoon watching you at the Old Bailey. So I think it's very important to do it, when you can. It's, as I've said, it's not always, and there are also a lot of rules and regulations now about who you can take to court and whether they have to go through a complex application process and so on. But yes, of course, mentorship is, we should all try and embrace that as something we do when we've had a lot of experience, without doubt, because experience matters.
Absolutely. And I want to talk now about sort of the sentencing. We've had a host of barristers on the show over the years, from Chris Dorr, KC, we've had through to Redline Chambers, and a whole host of people come on. And I want to get your thoughts on this as someone who's at the top of the game as well, in terms of the sentencing policy and prison reform in the UK, and what changes you would actually like to see maybe in the next few years.
Well, the question of prison reform is one that's very close to my heart, because I think the state of our prisons is truly, truly, truly shocking and unacceptable. I mean, I've had recent experience of this in a trial I've been doing in Winchester, where a defendant of good character, he was on a serious charge. He's 64 years old. He's never been in trouble before. But on the night before he was due to be tried, He was transferred from Wormer Scrubs Prison to Winchester Prison. He was put in a cell with a drug addict. He was up all night, watching TV, talking to himself, just being very disruptive. Throughout the whole trial, my client was in a cell with this person, so he barely slept during his own trial. He was woken up at 5 a.m. and brought to court in a little van in a sort of cage type thing, not given any breakfast, just treated like an animal. And that encapsulates the state of the prison system. The prison system is a complete shambles. The accommodation largely is out of date and inadequate and inappropriate for housing human beings in this century. Prison staff are not properly trained. Most of them have no interest in rehabilitation. They don't even know what it is. They just lock people up. A good proportion of them were working in Sainsbury's or Tesco's and then decided they wanted to become prison officers. Resources are too limited. Rehabilitation isn't readily available. Reoffending is too high. We operate a system of human dustbin in this country. The prison system just needs completely erasing, and we need to start all over again in terms of how many people we send to prison, why we send people to prison, and which institutions. You've got mentally disordered offenders, people with personality disorders, heavily mixed up with arch criminals. There's no discrimination in terms of sifting that. It's a shambles, it's chaos, and it has to be revisited in a big way. And this government, are not doing anything too seriously. Releasing people after 40% is just papering over the cracks. So I feel very strongly about the prison system. And in terms of sentencing policy generally, we send too many people to prison. We have a custodial obsession. And we're not creative enough in our sentencing options. So, I'm loath to be too critical because, I don't like being critical, but obviously I have very, very strong views on these matters.
And we want people to share their views, and thank you for being candid. But we also like to feel like we give people solutions or suggestions or thoughts for the future. So flipping it onto a perhaps more positive lens in terms of change or things could be do better. Is there like one or two actionable things that you would like to see that's actually achievable, that's just low hanging fruit?
No, well, I fully understand why you're asking that question, because as I was speaking, I was thinking I'm not saying anything constructive. I think, Rob, the starting point within our criminal justice process is to address the question of who we send to prison. That's the starting point. We have a prison population which is the biggest in the free world. So I think the government should, or whoever the government is, should instigate a consultation and or some form of operation targeting the question of who we send to prison. There should be much more rigorous guidelines on who we send to prison. We should really only be sending people to prison if they are dangerous. Okay, fine. If people commit offences of dishonesty and other types of offences that are not, on the face of it dangerous, there has to be scope for sending those people to prison, but they should become the exception rather than the rule. At the moment, we're just sending almost everybody who commits any offence which is vaguely serious to prison. Once we start sorting out the prison system and we drastically reduce prison numbers, and in conjunction, we look much more closely at constructive options to replace prison, which is the second of my proposals, then I think we can start to make progress. But whilst we have a custodial obsession, we're not going to get anywhere, because we're going to be refueling the commission of crime by triggering anger and frustration amongst a huge number of people who are going to prison, not being educated, not being rehabilitated, coming out and reoffending in a big way. So the starting point is look again at the concept of imprisonment and frame, developments in the criminal justice process around that.
Completely agree, and I'm just pausing for thought on that because
Yeah.
you put some really good context to it. Access to justice is something we're very passionate about here on the show. What does justice mean to you in a very, well, both narrow and broader sense?
What does justice mean
to you?
Yeah, I know I keep saying it, but that raises really significant issues. For me, justice is a very, very, very wide concept. So I don't think the criminal justice process always throws up justice. Can I just very briefly tell you what I mean by that?
Yes, please.
A kid of 16 who's convicted of murder as part of a joint enterprise stabbing and who is sentenced to life imprisonment, having been proved to be complicit in that murder, that is not justice, in my view, in circumstances where that individual has had no proper parenting and no proper education, comes from a broken home, comes from a home where there's been no guidance, where there has been no emotional input, and where essentially no leadership has taken place altogether. So very often in my work, because I've represented, not so much now, but 5-10 years ago, kids, very young kids, black kids mainly, convicted of homicide and so on, sent to prison for life, 16, 15, 17. A just verdict on the evidence may be, but in terms of the concept of justice generally, I've often looked at these people as they've been led off to start their life sentences and think, how can we do this? This person has had no opportunities in life whatsoever, has been the victim of terrible circumstances, and now we're locking them up for life. So I just want to use that as an example of how difficult I find the concept of justice to be. For me, justice should reflect just that. It should reflect the offender's true culpability, and that true culpability must stem not just from the act that leads them to be convicted or the offence that leads them to be convicted, but their wider circumstances. Unfortunately, in a trial, that can't really happen because the issue is limited to culpability for the offence. But I think sentencing should have a much more liberal and wider application, looking much more fundamentally at the offender's background and circumstances that it does. It does look at those background and circumstances, but it's too inflexible. It doesn't permit for radical reductions in sentence in order to take account of those circumstances. And I mean, there are, I'm not going to, because I don't want to, but I could give, very specific examples of where clients of mine have been sentenced to years and years imprisonment, where I feel genuinely they should not have gone to prison at all. So justice needs to have a much more liberal interpretation in the criminal justice process, in my view, than it currently does.
And again, thank you for sharing your experiences and rationale for that. And it's interesting to hear. You've done so many cases and seen so many things. Maybe flipping the question around a bit. What types of cases would you tend to turn down then, and why?
I can answer that question very simply. I won't do any case in which there is an element of anti-Semitism, because I'm a proud Jew. And as proud today as I've ever been. The reason why I am a fierce opponent, as I'm sure you are, and all of your listeners are, to any form of racism. But the second part of your question was, why would I not do such a case? And the answer is because I don't feel that I could do it with commitment and passion, and to the best of my ability. I come from a Holocaust surviving background. The last thing I'm going to do is to put my skills and energy into defending someone who, is prejudiced against Jews. To be honest, I tend to apply the same principle to all cases where there is an element of racism. I've turned down quite a very high profile case recently, which had nothing to do with anti-Semitism, but had a strong racist element. So I think actually maybe I was too quick to answer your question. I've turned down cases with an anti-Semitic angle. I've turned down cases with a racist angle. I don't think I would do any case with a racist angle in my career ever again. I may have done one or two a long time ago, because I don't feel that in cases with that racist element I could give my commitment to representing that offender. So that's my answer to that.
And probably comes back to what we talked about earlier in terms of being passionate and the values that you hold as well. It's just there's no alignment there, is there? And I feel strongly in that. We've had lots of discussions, and we've had Stephanie Boyce, former president of the Law Society of England and Wales, who's done great work along with various other change makers, Dana, Denise Smith, OBE, all come on the show that are passionate about diversity, equity, inclusion, and the inclusion piece. And myself as well. I'm half English, half Iraqi. I come from an international background as well. I'm passionate about ensuring these discussions, we do our best to educate, to try and eradicate as best we can. And it all comes down to, good people trying to do as much as they can to put good into society, to make a positive change. I'm very passionate about that.
I think, Rob, just to add very quickly, sorry, I just think for a criminal defence barrister, if there's any element of the case that means that you're liable even by 0.0001% not to do it with full commitment, you shouldn't do it. So whoever we're talking about and whatever particular complication there is, unless you can give 1000%, you just shouldn't do it. And I don't think people do on the whole. I don't know, but I don't think people do. Sorry, you were going to ask something else.
No, I'm an all-in guy. So, if I'm going to do something, and that's why we're on a hell of a journey with this show to make it more than just another podcast, to really, amplify, and hopefully as a legacy for me, look back and think, wow, the conversations and the things attached to the show really helped and changed people's lives and educated them.
Of course.
Gave them fun, fulfillment, education. Okay. We try not to get too political on the show, but in a sort of rising political rhetoric, if you like, and media sensationalization, because we can't get away from that. How can lawyers preserve, and legal professionals, of course, the principles of a fair trial and due process, in your opinion?
Well, I think, again, I can't speak for lawyers outside the context of the criminal justice process, but I think, I have great respect for the prosecution service in this country. So I don't want to focus, completely on the defence, although that's my pride and joy. I think on the whole, the criminal bar, those who prosecute the criminal bar are very professional and on the whole fair. And I've seen, I know, and I'm good friends with a number of extraordinarily, talented prosecutors. When I say friends, I don't really socialise, but we get on well. So I think the general objective in this country is to produce a fair trial on both sides and to perform, with integrity. That's so important, with commitment, with professionalism, with efficiency. And I think on the whole, we do produce fair trials. And I'm a, fervent sort of fan of the jury system. I think on the whole, verdicts are the right verdicts. And I think fundamentally, the system works well. It's not perfect, but it works well. Everyone strives to secure a just verdict in the circumstances. As I've said, the sentencing process is different. I think it's far too rigid in its approach. It produces a lot of injustice, not because the judges are bad. I think the judges in this country are great. I really think they do their very best in difficult circumstances just because of the system that we have. So I think just hard work, commitment, honesty, integrity, determination, mutual interest, and, the result is pretty much a fair trial in most cases.
And that's what we all we want at the end of the day. And Jeremy, this has been a very rich, authentic, and open and sort of to the point as well discussion, as I knew it was going to be, and that's why I was so excited to have you on the show today. But before I let you go, and this is quite a hard question because one piece of advice, I'm sure there's lots you'd like to do, but I want to try and be specific. One piece of advice you could give to the next generation of criminal barristers, appreciating we're in 2025 and things are changing at light speed. We've touched on technology, especially for those who want to try and get to the top like you have. What would you say? What's that one piece of advice?
I just think, Rob, that's quite a sort of emotional question for me because, it was my dream to go to the bar at a time when for a kid like me, it was a pipe dream, to be honest. When I think back now to how on earth it happened, I haven't got a clue how it happened, quite honestly. It just kind of a mystery to me. That's genuinely how I feel. So I would say, I just think, be relentless. If wherever you come from, whoever you are, whatever you look like, however you sound, just be relentless. Because all I can say is that I was relentless. I don't even think I meant to be relentless. I just was. And it's worked well, and I've done what I wanted to do. So I can only pass on my experience and what I feel was my driving force, which was passion and relentlessness, and say to any kid, young person, that wants to achieve in the profession, just be relentless, just go forward and just follow your dream. I know this probably sounds a bit sort of cliched, but it's just how it's been. It's just how it's been.
And it's true, isn't it? And I think sometimes when people think relentless, the reality with relentless, you can still be and should be and will be, if you're around the right people, an exceptionally kind citizen, brilliant human, good for society. So being relentless and focused and fierce in your role and still being a good citizen, for me, they all go hand in hand. And it's all about just being about the right people and having the right values.
Rob, the concept of relentlessness, you're absolutely spot on. I mean, when I say relentless, I don't mean relentless in a sort of cruel way. I mean relentlessness as becoming a barrister. And obviously my field of speciality is criminal defence. That relentlessness encompasses getting on very well with people, getting on with solicitors who might want to instruct you, getting on with the young people in those firms of solicitors, making them feel valued so that they value you, letting the families of accused people know that you care about their children that you're representing, getting on with prosecutors, respecting. So relentless, by relentlessness, I don't just mean, a sort of naked determination to succeed. I just mean a relentless in terms of embracing all and everything that might take you forward, but in so doing, helping and promoting the interests of other people as well, as a side, subsidiary consequence of your own perhaps selfish determination.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we're all running our own race at our own pace. And I guess that, thought in my head, my late grandfather always said to me, and he talked about the word respect, is, in any career, he said, laddie, make sure you live respected and die regretted. And I think it's, everything I try and bring to every day is that, right? You want to try and, respect each party, be, really respected. And hopefully a legacy that we all end up leaving is one that, you did good. I mean, we could go on for hours, Jeremy, but I know that. You are absolutely slammed. And it's been a fascinating discussion. We've been learning more about where you started, where you've got to, what you've been doing, your thoughts on the future and everything. So it's been an absolute masterclass. And I'm sure listeners are going to want to know more about you. So if they do, where can they go to find out more? Is there a particular website or is there a social media handle like LinkedIn people can go and follow you? If so, feel free to share.
I am on LinkedIn quite a lot. LinkedIn is probably the place. My chamber's website, www.25bedfordrow.com. And as you know, I've done quite a lot of stuff on the BBC. My BBC series, Murder, Mystery, and My Family, where we did 50 reviews of historic death penalty cases. That's really interesting. I'm not great on social media and stuff. I'm from a bygone era, but I would like to thank you, Rob. You've asked some really good, incisive questions, and I know this has been about me, but I do value the opportunity to explain, the path and to send out the message that it is possible to follow your dream because I have done it in circumstances where it was against the odds. So it's great to be able to tell people, do it because, it can happen. And, so I'm really grateful to you for giving me that opportunity.
We're honoured to have you, and feel the fear and do it anyway, right? It's been an absolute joy hosting you. Genuinely, Jeremy, really enjoyed it. On the Legally Speaking podcast, sponsored by Clio, wishing you lots of continued success. Sounds bizarre saying that given everything you've already achieved, but no doubt you'll continue to do more. For now, from all of us, over and out. Thank you for listening to this week's episode. If you like the content here, why not check out our world-leading content and collaboration hub, the Legally Speaking Club, over on Discord. Go to our website, www.legallyspeakingpodcast.com, for the link to join our community there. Over and out.